Hi, I'm here with Christine Mowry, Executive Director of Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, and Jen Rifkin, who's the Director of Clinical Programs.
Clinical Services.
Almost right. I almost got that right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Wanted to talk today about a couple of things. First of all, maybe a quick overview of what you do. What the
Sure.
agency
So
does.
at SYFS, we provide all kinds of different services to the community. We have an outpatient counseling clinic. We provide case management services. We are a SMOC application site, emergency fuel assistance site. We provide some social emotional programs for middle school girls and boys, hopefully this summer, and some college readiness workshops. We are the lead agency in the Shrewsbury Coalition for Addiction Prevention and Education. We have a large youth mental health first aid program which combines youth, adult, older adult public safety trainings for the public. That's a certification program that teaches people how to identify somebody that's struggling with an onset of a mental health challenge or substance use, and then how to have a conversation and link that person to the proper services. What am I missing?
I think you've covered most of it.
Let's talk about.
We also, one last piece. We have our youth wraparound services.
Oh,
So we
right.
work really closely with the Shrewsbury Public Schools
Okay.
to provide ongoing care coordination and case management for families who have needs that might be a little bit too acute for the school itself to manage. So we have a clinician that works in the home, in the school, in our clinic, wherever is most comfortable for the family to try and get some of those needs met.
Let's talk a little bit about the mental health first aid
Yes.
program, because that. Can you tell me a little bit about
Sure,
it?
of course. So, I mean, statistically speaking, we know that 1 in 5 adolescents between the ages of 12 and 18 will have a diagnosable mental illness. And we also know that 50% of those mental illnesses will have an onset before the age of 14 years old. Unfortunately, right now, the median span of time between onset of symptoms and treatment is about 10 years. So SYFS has taken the initiative to provide this training program really to help adults identify this early onset. So if we look at statistics just in the town of Shrewsbury, that equates to about 1,000 students between the middle schools and the high school that will be impacted.
What kind of mental health issues are we talking about?
So primarily, I think what we see in our clinic, we have anxiety, some depression, a series of disorders that are related to adjusting to new circumstances. That often you see a lot of anxiety and depression sort of with those. And you know, kids are going through a period of transition. There's a lot to adjust to. There's a ton of stress being a student. There's constant tests and peer pressures. Social media, I think, has a pretty significant impact on the functioning of kids on a day-to-day basis and their mental
Because
health.
that's one of my questions. Again, I'm old. I understand I'm old. But we didn't seem to have, we had tests at school, frequently. What we didn't have was social media of any kind. And I get a sense that we were outside playing sports and things like that more, and particularly in a not organized manner. And is that part of what we're seeing?
Well, I mean, I certainly can't speak to a decrease in the amount of time that kids are sort of playing outside, but I am clearly aware that the number of hours that kids are spending attached to screens has skyrocketed in the last decade or so, and there's been a lot of emerging research about the potential damage of social media and time spent on social media. My sense is the more time someone is spending on social media, the more likely they are to experience depression, anxiety, and some other mental health symptoms.
Yeah. So what kind of, how do people identify this? How do you teach people to identify problems? And then what can they do about it?
Sure. So we look for an aggregation of symptoms, the duration of symptoms, and where it's impacting a student's daily life. So if it's impacting them across the board, at school, at home, in their relationships, when they're withdrawing from extracurricular activities or things that they found pleasure in previously, that's sort of a red flag that we look for. And the trouble with identifying the onset during adolescence is that many of the symptoms mimic normal adolescent development.
Sure.
You know, the range of normal behavior during adolescence is really quite large. So, we look for an aggregation. So when there's withdrawal from everything, if their sleep pattern changes, either sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, We look for sometimes volatility or aggressiveness, hostility in young people can be a sign of depression.
Okay.
But again, it's really very similar to normal adolescent development. So I think the duration, when we see symptoms that last for 2 weeks or longer, that's a sign for us to get ask some more questions. And then again, where it's impacting their lives. So, I think it's really important for parents and for teachers to really understand what the onset looks like, and even more importantly, to understand how to look for motivation behind behavior. So behavior is generally never the problem. There's always a motivating factor behind the behavior. So what we teach people to do is really sort of think a little bit beyond what's on the surface and look, if you picture it as an iceberg, the behavior is sort of what we see above the water. But what we want people to do is ask some questions and try to uncover what's driving the behavior. And so I think it's really important for parents to be educated about what those signs and symptoms look like, and understand how to talk to a young person non-judgmentally, empathetically, and really understand that whatever that young person is experiencing is their reality, even though it might be very different from what the parent is perceiving or experiencing. I think that's probably the best skill that a parent or a teacher or anyone in contact with an adolescent could learn.
Are they spending less time with friends? Are they spending more time sort of holed up in their room? Are you seeing an increase in irritability that seems to not have a precipitating factor that you can identify? Those are some of the symptoms that we might see in boys. And certainly if you have those concerns and you're able to have a conversation with that child, we want to potentially get them to professional help. As Christine mentioned, we have an outpatient counseling program at Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, and the good news is a lot of these disorders, anxiety disorders, depression, these are very treatable disorders. Very treatable disorders. So it's important for both the families and the youth to understand that they don't have to live with these symptoms forever. Many of these disorders are treated within a 3-month period. Come to counseling, you gain a couple skills, and you're off, good to go.
Wow.
So there are lots of different risk factors. Trauma is a major risk factor in many diagnoses. There's a genetic risk factor. There are environmental factors. There are many different things to take into consideration. But what I think is really important, and I'm glad that Jen said, get them help early on, because what happens with a mental illness, just like any other illness, if it's not treated, it progresses. So this is when we see young people that are really struggling with something, and struggling maybe quietly and without help, start to develop ways to cope with that are not necessarily healthy, and that might look like substance use or non-suicidal self-injury. So it's really important. Early identification and early intervention is really crucial.
Well, thank you for coming today and sharing this information. It's a scary time to be a parent.
Yeah.
It's a scary time to be a parent. So, and they can look to you for some help.
Yes,
and
hopefully,
some ideas. That's great. And we'll be right back. Hi, I'm here with Sheriff Lou Evangelidis. Thank you for coming today. We're not going to talk about your role as sheriff. We're going to talk about your role as chairperson of Massport, which is a really fascinating development, I think, for people in Central Mass who don't always think of Massport as affecting them, but yet it has a great effect on people in Central Mass. Wanted to first thank you for coming.
Great to be here again.
Wanted to ask you, how did this all happen? How did you get involved with Massport, and what does Massport really do?
Sure. Well, Matt, again, thank you for having me. And we were on not too long ago talking about the sheriff's operation, which I was really pleased to get a chance to talk to you about the work we do up at the jail and in the communities. And we never even got a chance to talk about Massport, so we figured we'd do a separate show for it. So I'm glad to be back and to talk about Massport, because I've learned a lot, obviously, in my position in Massport. So let me explain how it came to be. When the Baker-Polito team was elected governor and lieutenant governor back in 2014, the way the appointments work, governor gets a lot of appointments to boards for community colleges, college boards, state college boards, Department of Health, all these different boards that are set up, and there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of appointments. One of the more prestigious appointments, I believe, is to the Massport Board of Directors. And the way the board is set up, the governor gets one appointment per year. So it takes a long time for a new governor to kind of take control of the board.
Sure.
But I was appointed, and at the same time, the Secretary of Transportation, Stephanie Pollock, was appointed. I filled the very beginning of a term that someone had just left, and Stephanie Pollock was the governor's appointment as secretary who sits on the board. So there were two of us came in right at the same time in April of 2015. The governor took office in January of 2015 with Lieutenant Governor Polito, who's obviously from here. And I think it was a nod to this community, to Worcester County, that we had a big part in the administration's success. Sure. I think it was a nod to law enforcement being a sheriff, and they felt it was a good appointment to make, reflecting the importance of this region to the administration and to Massport itself. So I was really honored when the governor called me, told me he was interested in appointing me to Massport. I was more than happy to accept the appointment. I sat on the board for about it's a 7-year appointment. So I sat on the board for about 3 years. And in 2017, the chairman, who was Mike Angelini, who was actually one of the first, if only chairman from Worcester previously, his term expired and the chairmanship thus opened up. And the governor and lieutenant governor called me about the possibility of becoming chairman of Massport. I told them if they would like me to serve as chairman, I would be honored to do it for them. So I took over the chairmanship moving in a couple of years ago now. Let me just explain a little bit what Massport is.
Sure,
Here's
yes,
what I've
please.
learned. So serving on the board, you learn very quickly that Massport is truly, and this is what I think the governor and lieutenant governor really want people to understand, and through me, is that it's the Massachusetts Port Authority. And many times people think of Logan Airport, and that's it.
That's it.
And it has
Boston.
nothing to
It's
do with
all
us.
Boston.
It's all Boston.
Massport has nothing to do with it.
And nothing could be further from the truth. And the commitment to making this an economic engine for all of this region, even beyond Worcester County, almost the entire state, if not New England, you can say Massport is one of those economic engines. And I'll explain why. Massport is just celebrated its 60th year. We were created to basically take over Logan Airport. But in those 60 years, we now have complete control over the Port of Boston. That means all the shipping that comes in, the Chinese vessels, the amount of people that do the loading and unloading of the ships and the containers and the cargo and the transportation, all those jobs are impacted by Massport. And to accommodate the Chinese shipping industry, we've actually had to do some dredging to make the harbor deeper. These are hundreds of millions of dollar projects. We've had to increase the crane operation to bring in some immense cranes to have 7 stories of cargo to be transported off and put back onto these cargo ships so we can compete worldwide. These are kind of the investments that Massport makes for this community, for jobs, to get cargo in and out, never mind the cruise lines. Then you've got the airports of Logan, Hanscom, and Worcester, of course, which we'll talk about a little bit more detail. And don't leave out another area that is as critical as any, and that is when Massport was created, the South Street Seaport was essentially a warehouse district. And if people might remember going to the No Name Restaurant or Jimmy's or Anthony's Pier 4, but mostly it was nothing.
Yeah, outside of that, there was
Nothing.
nothing to go
And
see.
if you haven't been down there the last 5 years, I'd strongly recommend it. But Massport had a lot of that property. And Massport has been a leader in the development of that property. And this means some major real estate deals have been made through Massport to go and develop that whole area, but do it in continuity with our mission, which is, Massport, which has to do with seafood operations, which we've tried to continue, things like that, job creation, in conjunction with the neighborhood philosophy. So it's been a very interesting to watch the development and be part of that as well. And a big focus on the diversity of the developers that we bring into it. So we've had a big impact, I think, in not only Boston, but the region. But one of my primary focuses, obviously, and if you look at the Massport operation, which is immense, Worcester Airport is not is a small piece of the whole Massport story.
Sure.
But it's a really important piece of the story for the people in this region. And I can promise you one thing. There isn't a time I don't speak with the governor or lieutenant governor when the Worcester Airport is not at the forefront of their mind. How's it doing? What can we do to help? How can we continue to promote Worcester to make it that second airport that Boston is and will desperately need this region at some point? So there's a lot of focus on Worcester. I'm kind of going on here, but I'll
that's
just
okay.
cover.
The Massport put in the new technology that allows different kinds of airplanes or jets.
Well,
to
I
come
wanted
in,
to explain that because this is what I want people to understand about the commitment Massport. Massport took over the Worcester Regional Airport in 2009. So you may remember the old days with Worcester Airport. It was run by, I believe it was the city. Yes. The state took it over through Massport about 10 years ago. And in those 10 years, there's been over $100 million investment. Now think about that for a minute, $100 million investment in Worcester Airport. So again, if you haven't been up to Worcester Airport in the last few years, you've really missed some incredible changes. And the biggest of them all was the Category 3 landing system. And this is a system that allows planes to land in virtually zero visibility, about 100-foot visibility they can land in. Before, you needed significantly more visibility, and there's a lot of visibility issues that do crop up when you build an airport as high as Worcester.
Sure.
But the truth be told, the days of having to be diverted, flights canceled, all those things, I think they're pretty much behind us at Worcester now. Now we're bringing airlines to look at Worcester with the idea that the continuity of the flights, the consistency, the lack of needing to cancel flights is so strong now that many airlines are interested in coming to Worcester. So with that, we've got the renovations of the terminal. We've got
a great terminal,
beautiful terminal. Parking is extraordinary. Yeah. $7 a day. Compare that to Boston and Logan, which you're talking sometimes $50+ a day.
And just getting in and out.
Right.
Of the airport's a lot easier. The historically, and I think there's a big role still, but I wanted to ask you about it, cargo and corporate air, that was a lot of what Worcester served and is still serving. Am I correct in that assessment? Because that's a big service to this region.
Well, I'll give you an example. Yes, it is, and it's something we want to continue to enhance. We've got the capacity. We flew out, just so you can understand the real players we have now. The biggest players we have right now are, of course, JetBlue, which flies to Florida on daily flights, both to Orlando and to Fort Lauderdale. We've got flights in JetBlue every morning to New York City. So if you need to do business in New York, or if you're connecting anywhere throughout the world, you can get on JetBlue in Worcester, fly to JFK, and you're on your way. We also have daily flights to Philadelphia, which again is a connection through American to all the destinations American flies out of Philadelphia. And we are starting in the end of this summer, flights from Delta is coming on board to fly to Detroit, which again connects you not only to Detroit, but to anywhere Delta goes, particularly in the Midwest and the West. Okay. So we've got some great progress. There are some cargo planes as well that we are utilizing. But to give an example how exciting this is, not only just yesterday, I got a phone call from someone who was related to a pretty high executive at FedEx. And they said, would you be interested in talking to us about bringing FedEx operations to Worcester Airport and using that as one of our bases to land and transport their cargo throughout this region? And I initiated that conversation by getting them to the right people at Massport. That conversation is taking place now. Lord knows what the future brings, but I think it's bright for Worcester. I think we have a great airport now. Runway improvements, the improvements to the terminal, the lighting, landing systems are top notch. The ability and the message, I guess, we always try to bring in. I'm going to be a salesperson now for Worcester Airport because I believe in it so strongly. And I was a young kid. My dad and we used to go to the airport, sit up there and just watch the planes. When I was a little kid in the 60s, we used to just watch planes go in and out of Worcester Airport. I never flew in my life, but I'll never forget that. And to see what happened, what that airport has the potential for today is extraordinary. Wow. And what we want people to do is think Worcester, fly Worcester. If you use Worcester one time, I promise you, you'll go back because it's so easy. If you get in your home, especially in Metro West, you get in your car, you're going to Logan, you have no idea really how long it's going to take you to get there, and the possible hassles, and the fact that once you get home, you know that once you land in Logan, you still got a long way to get home, and the parking and the hassle. Worcester on the other side, it's guaranteed probably from the Metro West area, 20-minute drive to the airport, easy parking, cheap parking. You can get from your house to probably sitting on your plane in something about 45 minutes. I mean, house to plane in 45 minutes. And the prices are very reasonable and the accommodations are excellent. And I think if more and more people use Worcester, that will just get us to be able to go to more and more airlines and tell them, give us a chance, come to Worcester, we'll make it work for you. And we hope ultimately Worcester will be the great success story as the second airport to Logan, serving this region in a way that we all benefit from.
Moving in that direction. That's great. Well, thank you very much for sharing a little bit
Yeah.
about what you do with Massport. I think that's so exciting for people in throughout Central Mass and throughout Massachusetts. So thank you for coming.
Matt, it was great to be here as always.
Great. Thank you very much. And we'll be right back. Hi, I'm here with Hank Stolz, host of the Hank Stolz Experience on Channel 3 and on Radio Worcester. Thanks for coming and joining us. And
Well, thank you.
wanted to find out more about all your changing landscape in media. We've been talking to other people about how much media has changed, and I know that's the case with you as well.
Well, it certainly has been. I mean, you figure I came into this Worcester market about 22 years ago, and I started as a reporter at WTAG, a position that would no longer exist to be a reporter and a news anchor. All of that is farmed out because of all of the consolidation. In those days, we had a full newsroom that competed with the Worcester Telegram and Gazette and Worcester Magazine. We'd all show up at the same events, try and get the news out first, and then I went on to do the mornings at WTAG for 10 years and the mornings at WCRN for 10 years. And now, sort of in this DIY environment, do it yourself, have started this Radio Worcester project. And I got to tell you, I really, my own feeling is that it's sort of back to the future. And the back part is what's the radio that we remember when we were younger? And that it was a local radio station, a hometown radio station. You had people who were very, very talented, but when they were talking, in their language you knew that they were from Central Massachusetts, the landmarks, the place they went to get ice cream in the summer, the places that, they went skiing at Wachusett Mountain. Instead of what we have now, which is a lot of radio consolidation, a lot of satellite, a lot of, you can hear it in Worcester, but you might be hearing the same program if you're in Omaha, Nebraska, you might be hearing it if you're in Billings, Montana. So our idea at Radio Worcester, and we're hooked up with our friends at Worcester Magazine and 102.9 Unity Radio and others carry it, is to, the back part really is that hometown feel. We are centered on Central Massachusetts, but also the future part is that you can download the show if you miss it in the morning as a podcast. So you're driving home and you drive home with us. All of our best interviews are under the name of the morning show, Talk of the Commonwealth. You can go to so many different avenues now to be able to get to the programming. So we sort of created our own radio network.
Sure, which is exciting, and I say sure, like I understand it all. It's still so diverse in many ways, and so unlike what you and I mean, I used to work all the time with WKOX and WMRC in Milford, and running events and was on the air with them all the time, and you knew who your audiences were. And now it's a little more difficult to sort that out.
Yeah, very true. So you and I would hop in the car, and our favorite DJ would be on, and we'd want to and we were in the car at the same time every day, and he was our ride into work or our ride home or our ride around town, but it was destination. I mean, we had to be in the car at the specific time that he was on, or we missed whatever bits he did that day, and somebody else would be talking about it around the water cooler, and we go, oh, I can't believe I got in the car 5 minutes late, I missed that funny phone call or whatever it was. Now, you go out, and of course I spent my whole career really in AM radio.
Sure.
So, you go to a whole generation now and you say, when was the last time you put on AM radio? Is that even, I don't even know if it comes in cars anymore. No. I mean, there's a whole, so that the whole pie is shrinking. But even if you say, I think to a lot of people of a certain generation, so who's your favorite radio DJ, or you flip on the radio at a certain time and they go, well, yeah, unless I'm listening to Sirius Radio, or unless I've got a podcast that I'm listening to at that time, or unless I've got my book on tape. It's the way in which the media is consumed today, I think, is just vastly different than it was, let alone 20 years ago when I began in this market. I think vastly different than it was, 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
The change has accelerated, hasn't it? I mean,
it really has. The technology is just so amazing and driving everything. And that's why, you see the big companies coming in and they'll take over these radio stations, for example. And on the one hand, we lament the fact that we don't have anybody local doing radio news anymore.
That's one of my major complaints in life, yes.
On the other hand, of course, their point of view for those big conglomerates is, hey, we've got plenty of people, and as long as the guy in Albany, New York, or Springfield, or wherever he is physically sitting, as long as he can say Worcester instead of Worcester, fine.
They're all set.
Here, here's what we want you to read. Now, they won't have the feel for it, or they won't know the background, but they'll be able to give you sort of the bare bones of what was on the front page of the paper that day.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest complaints. I still listen, as I grew up listening, because I'm a newsaholic, to WBZ, AM news most of the time, and I miss your program because that gave me the balance. All right, Central Mass and Greater Boston, maybe to Metro West. And I really miss WKOX a lot because that was the middle in between.
Yeah.
And I used to get all three, and that's how I spent my day.
Right.
And now you can't get news except for BZ, thankfully. And even them, I'm starting to think we're going to see some changes.
You wonder about that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it really was locally driven. And the people who, sat next to you in the pew at church, or you bumped into at the grocery store, those were the same people who were working at the radio station, selling the radio station, broadcasting on the radio station. So it was it was their community too. I mean, I don't think that anybody went into work and really thought about, gosh, here I am, I'm carrying the banner for the community. It just was the way that it was.
Yes.
So you didn't have to think about that.
Yeah. So the Hank Stolz experience, I know you have a lot of guests talking about things in Central Mass on Channel 3. And Radio Worcester, what your program on Radio Worcester?
So Radio Worcester, again, I mean, we really are focused locally. Our feeling is that even local radio now, if you have local hosts, so many of them are so concerned with what is happening in Washington. And our feeling is you can get that honestly anywhere. We don't shy away from that, and if we do have callers about it, we like to think that we're coming at it at least with a central Massachusetts voice. But our bread and butter really is resource officer in Claremont Academy. Big subject recently. There's students who are protesting at Holy Cross. That's what we're going to be talking about, because that, we think, are the kinds of stories that right now are being underserved. So you're right that the TV show and the radio show have always differed, in that the TV show has always been, because of the format, it's interview driven. As a matter of fact, this is very interesting for me because usually I'm in your spot doing what you're doing. The radio show is always caller driven. What is that topic of the day? Have a guest on who will set that up. Because we don't have as many calls because of our reach as we're starting out at Radio Worcester, we're a little more interview driven, but eventually that will be more caller driven. What is it that the caller wants to talk about?
Yes, it keeps evolving.
Right.
As we wrap up, let me ask, how do people find you and Radio Worcester?
Well, I am glad you asked. Thanks to the World Wide Web, which just celebrated their 30th anniversary, I heard, it's pretty easy. We have wonderful partners at Worcester Magazine. If you simply go to worcestermag.com, you'll see the Radio Worcester icon at the top of the page. If you click that, that's great, because we love to support Worcester Mag. They're local, their mission is the same as ours. Or you can simply go to radioworcester.com and you can just live stream us day and night. 102.9 FM is one of our partners during the day in Worcester. WCRN AM 830 on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, replays our best of in the afternoon.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being my guest.
I appreciate it.
Years ago, I was a guest on your show.
Bet, yeah.
Now I got to flip it around a little bit. So thank you very
Full circle.
much. And we'll be right back. Hoping that today we treat everybody we meet with kindness, respect, and tolerance. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.